So there's an interesting kind of statistic in today's society that Christians in, or whatever you want to, however you want to just like define that, evangelicals maybe, that have been polled in recent years by like Pew, Gallup, Barna, organizations like this that kind of collect social statistics, have been finding that younger evangelicals, or people that are going to church, have some strange kind of ideas. They have some strange kind of patterns to them. One is that even though they claim to be a Christian, they also don't do Christian things. They don't go to church more. Like the average attendance for churches among Gen X and millennials is about once a month, one Sunday out of 4. So they don't really go to church, and then they don't do things that are actually commanded in the Bible. Like if they don't read the Bible, I mean, most of them either they don't even have one, is becoming an increasingly statistically large majority as well. Like they don't even know what the 10 Commandments are. They couldn't tell you any of the things in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. They don't take communion. They don't know what communion signifies. They couldn't tell you the names of the books of the Bible, things like that. Like they don't really know. But additionally, there are things like that when you take explicit commands given in the Bible, and if they were asked, is that something that you do? Their answer is typically no. And one of the interesting ways that that's true is in regards to evangelism. They think, if you find most millennials, as well as Gen Z, they tend to have the thought that choosing to witness or to proselytize is the word most often used. Proselytizing your faith, your beliefs, is either immoral or is even violence. Is becoming that it's actually an imposition against someone else's beliefs. And this sentiment has created a strange kind of conundrum for church leaders and Christian leaders of like, how do we motivate people to do what the Bible tells them to do when in fact they think that doing the things the Bible says to do are actually evil? And why do they think that? Well, one of the reasons, I think, at least here in the United States, like this really applies to the United States. If you go into other countries, like the cost of converting to Christianity is much higher, and so as a result, the commitment to Christ thereafter is a lot more robust, especially in places like South Asia and the Middle East and Japan, say, or in Africa. So it's different in other places. But here in America, because things are so comfortable, quite honestly, you could live your whole life and you might not even know what the convictions or the beliefs of your coworkers are because you simply spend more time talking about sports, which is kind of the crux of the thing, of that honestly it's very easy to find out a person's sports team because they wear the stuff on Sundays, or their job might even reward them for doing so, for showing company spirit or showing sports spirit during the fall or whatever, like giving out like token rewards for wearing your favorite sports team's memorabilia. And yet, quite honestly, we're discouraged from discussing things like religion, sexuality, political convictions, so forth, while we're at work because of the fear of offending someone. So it's an interesting time to be alive, to say the least. But the Bible actually has something else to offer to this discussion as well, in that it presumes that the act of witnessing will result in negative feedback, which should not be super surprising to anyone. That when you, like, say, if I say that I'm a Christian and that I believe this, that is wrong, if someone believes the opposite, the antithesis of those statements, that is right, or that is morally neutral even, it puts us at odds. Now, we don't have, like, it means that we have the freedom to disagree with one another, of course. However, because our society internalizes those things so deeply in that you don't have, let's say, homosexual preferences, you are a homosexual. You don't have whatever heterosexual preferences. You're a heterosexual. You're a cisgender. You're a, like, we internalize these things into our selfness, that if I say this is wrong, or that this, that, some other thing is immoral, or that is sinful, they're saying that I as an individual is inherently sinful, which is interesting because that in itself, like, I'm sinful too, even as a white cisgender male, right? I'm still sinful too. Yet they perceive that as being discriminatory, that I'm excluding them, or that I hate them per se. And of course, how do you respond when you perceive yourself to have been hated? Often, you hate them back. And we don't talk about it in those terms very often in society, but that's the way it is, honestly. That conflict breeds conflict, right? Instead of choosing, like, we could just choose to agree to disagree on some matters, be friends otherwise. And I actually have friends of mine at work that, like, our total, like, the sum total of our relationship is disagreeing about things like pop culture. That he, like, loves Star Wars, I'm kind of done with it. Like, they need to work a little bit harder on rescuing this thing from the dustbin before. But you know what? He and I, we totally could go see a Star Wars film together, and him and I would have different opinions about how it went down, and the fact that we disagree actually builds the relationship and makes it stronger. So, all of that, when Jesus was sending out his disciples for the first time, he said that I was sending you out as sheep among wolves. Not as sheep among sheep, not as wolves among wolves. You're the vulnerable ones. They are going to attack you, and when they attack you, they're going to win, is what he was saying. And every single book of the New Testament reads this way, of that, listen, if you're on my team and you do what I'm telling you to do, you're going to suffer, it's going to be violent, they're going to feast on your blood. And Revelations talks about that there's an altar built, and underneath that altar is not stones, it's not precious stones, it's not a foundation, but it's actually souls of those who had been martyred for the name of Christ, literally crying out, when are you going to give us the justice we deserve? That in the 7 letters from Revelation talks that you've suffering. In all of Paul's letters, he talks about how he has suffered for the name of Christ, and in 2 Corinthians talks about how there's a thorn in his flesh, and he prayed for God to take it from him, and God's response is, my grace is sufficient. He doesn't take it away. He's like, no, listen, but there's a good thing that's going to come out of this. So I think as Christians, if you are a Christian, you need to accept the reality that there are people that are not going to want to be your friend because they have different beliefs than you do. You're not going to be able to be everybody's buddy. But if you're afraid of that, if you're afraid of not being liked by everyone, if you're afraid of that people are going to reject you, that especially as society continues to decline and become more and more hostile towards Christian ideals, if you're afraid of what could happen if people found out that you're a Christian, or that if you decided that you were going to witness to someone else, that if you're afraid of what could happen, if you're afraid of being doxxed for having Christian content on your channel or on your social media, if you're afraid of those things, then you should probably assess where your heart truly lies, because maybe you're not as much of a Christian. Maybe you're not as in love with God as you think that you are. Maybe just something to consider is maybe God is not as much of a priority for you as you think it is. Because if right now you're having these kind of harsh discussions when things aren't really that bad yet, what's going to happen when things start getting worse? When are you going to decide then? Is Christianity just a convenience for you? Something that gives you community and something that helps you feel fulfilled and feel comforted currently, while there's still buildings on every corner that you can go to on Sundays? But what happens when those buildings start to close? When people start burning those buildings down, the way that is happening currently in many other countries all around the world? What are you going to do then? Are you going to stop going? Are you going to decide that it really wasn't worth it after all? That it's not that important to you? Is that what you're going to decide? Because you have to make those decisions now while it is still comfortable, because if you wait until then, you're going to make the convenient decision then that you're making now. The product of convenience then that you're making now. So, something to consider, that this Christian life is not a resort. It is not a carnival cruise. Instead, it's a warship. It's a meat grinder. Like, it is a hard, harsh challenge. And we in the West, we in America, are about to start finding out just what that means.